Welcome to my latest computerized Europa scenario. This is France44. I've been working on this little by little, gradually for the last few months, trying to get everything ready to go, and I'm just about there. The biggest thing I have to do next is the painstakingly slow data entry in order to handle all of the reinforcements, withdrawals, substitutions, conversions, upgrades, all those different kinds of things, all the way through the end of the scenario. Now I have all that done for the first few turns, so that's ready to go in that sense. I can play out the first few turns, and then I end up at the point where I don't have any more reinforcements in the system. So I've got to get that done. But it's about ready to go, so I thought I would demonstrate how things work here, what's going on with France44. And the first thing to keep in mind is that this is not Second Front. This is not invasion of Europe. This is not invasion of France. This is a scenario based on having the invasions already happened past tense, I should say, and finding out what happens when the Allies attempt to break out of Normandy. Can they race across France? Can the Germans set up a new line? That sort of thing. So I've already done a D-Day 44 scenario that allows the Allied player to choose when and where to land and fight out the amphibious parts of that. I've also already done an Anvil 44 scenario that handles the invasion of southern France. So for France 44, I'm not going to redo those amphibious invasions. This is going to just be a non-amphibious, a land-based campaign, and we won't have to worry much at all about naval stuff here. However, that does raise an issue. I decided after tinkering around with this and thinking that maybe it would start on the July 1 44 turn, maybe it would start on the August 1 44 turn. I eventually decided that July 2 44 is a good time to start. But the slight problem with that is, let me jump down here a bit, the Anvil Dragoon landings in southern France. Now, that actually happened on the 15th of August 1944. The Germans did not offer much in the way of defense there, and by the 2nd of September, so it's essentially the same game turn, same player turn. By the 2nd of September, the Allies are already up around Lyon here. Now, based on my Anvil 44 scenario, it seems like using the Europa game system, it's probably impossible to recreate an advance that fast, to get the Allies to land on the beaches down here, take Marseille, march up the valley of the Rhone River here, and get that far north that fast. It just doesn't seem to happen. So having already played that out, I decided I didn't want to have to go through it again, but I've got to figure out somehow how am I going to get those forces integrated into what's happening into this larger France 44 scenario, because they do make a big difference. And so what I've decided is that Anvil Dragoon is going to happen more or less historically, while the scenario has already started in the Normandy and the general vicinity of Normandy, and that the forces from Anvil Dragoon, both the Allies and the Axis, will then appear in the Lyon area on approximately the 1 September 1944 turn. Now, that's going to be slightly randomized. They might appear a little bit earlier, they might appear a little bit later, but probably they're going to appear around Lyon on the September 1 turn. That then puts them in a position as historical, and more or less the same time as historical, to then threaten the rear of the Axis forces, which are probably still going to be fighting at Normandy at that time. So going along with that, the Axis forces that are on the map in the south of France that we were just looking at down here, these are frozen in place. They can't move until one of two things happens. And the first thing is the Anvil Dragoon landings, which as I say, is slightly randomized, but probably going to happen on August 15th. Until the Anvil Dragoon landings occur, these units can't move at all. The other thing that might trigger them to be able to move is if the Allied player breaks out of Normandy ahead of time before they did historically and start moving toward Paris. In that case, the German forces in the south of France will be released whenever that happens in the north. So one of those two things will happen to get those forces up around Lyon and then be under German control when they can move at that time. Now, the other thing is over here, we click over this way, German forces in Brittany and on the Atlantic coast are also frozen in place at the beginning of the scenario, because any sensible German player is going to realize that they can't hold Normandy forever, so they better start getting some of these forces off the Atlantic coast and out of Brittany before it's too late to do so. So they're going to be frozen in place again until the Allies start to break out of Normandy. So there's some things happening in the background which I don't like to reveal to the players, but when those events occur in the background, then the German player will be notified that, yeah, all those forces that are frozen over there on the Atlantic coast, they're now free to move, which probably means moving east as fast as possible. So that's what's happening at the beginning of this, because again, it's not about invading France, it's not about invading Europe, it's about trying to figure out what happens when the Allies are already ashore historically, both in Normandy and coming up from Anvil Dragoon. Are the Germans going to be able to do anything to prevent the Allies from sweeping into Berlin, a year ahead of time or whatever? All right, so that's what's going on there. Right now we're looking at the map, and I'll just kind of scoot around here a little bit. Oop, that's too far. And we can see we've got a lot of area to play with. But to begin with, we're going to be looking at the Normandy area. So I'm going to shift in here, although it's possible to play zoomed like that. I find it a whole lot easier for me personally to be able to read and click if I zoom into this level here. I don't see as much of the map, but it enables me to click where I want to click more easily. So looking at this, let's bring this panel back up. So the scenario is ready to start now. As usual in my scenarios, this allows for completely free redeployment of both sides, and that includes forces that would otherwise be frozen. If you're the German player and you don't want your forces frozen in southern France, well, in free deployment, put them someplace else, assuming the Allied player agrees to that. Likewise, all those German forces over in Brittany on the Atlantic coast, maybe you want to freely deploy those back into Normandy or someplace farther to the east, maybe around Paris or whatever. So you can do that if you want, but this is just going with the historical deployments. I have not redeployed anything here. Now, when I say historical deployments, if you've seen any of my previous videos or read anything that I've been doing on earlier scenarios, you know the way that I like to do historical deployments is that I can usually tell where all of the divisions go, and so they go into their historical places. And as for the non-divisional units, they get randomly deployed within the basic area where they were historically assigned. But every time the game loads, that random deployment of the non-divisional units is a little bit different. So the game never starts exactly the same, and it makes it difficult to say, oh, I have a perfect plan for what's going on here. So I haven't even looked yet. I don't know where all the non-divisional units were redeployed to, but I know that the ones that were in Normandy are almost certainly in Normandy, and the ones that were in Brittany are probably in Brittany, and that sort of thing. Exact hexes, I don't know, but we can find out if we want to look around. So let's not do any redeployments. Let's go ahead and jump in here and say that we are ready to begin. We're going to start getting some informational screens coming up, and it tells us what I just took 10 minutes to explain, that Axis units in Brittany on the Atlantic coast and in southern France are frozen until events trigger their release. So they're just sitting there and the German player can't move them. So here we are with the July 2, 1941 turn. We get information about the situation here, what's going on. We'll close that. We go to the initial phase of the Allied player for the July 2, 1944 turn. And this is just informational, telling us that, okay, supplies, the Allied player has tons and tons of supplies. You don't really need to worry about the quantity of supplies. This, by the way, as usual, is using my experimental supply system that has depots and supply points and so forth, most of which gets handled behind the scenes, and it offers some quick and easy ways for the players to handle those things. There are lots of units already sitting around in the UK, and here's another one that arrived this turn. And again, those are sitting in the UK, so if you want to use them, you've got to get them over to the continent, which we'll get to in a minute. So that was informational. Special replacements, no special replacements happening right now, so we will just end that. We get into the replacement phase. If you've seen some of my previous videos, you know that each nationality has its own pool of infantry replacements and sometimes armor replacements. U.S. armor replacements can be shared, and on and on. I won't go through all that again because I've done it before, but for each nationality you can resurrect eliminated units from the replacement pool, or you can rebuild cadres that are on the map, or because in some cases here units might lose some number of points, combat factors, you can restore those to full strength. We're not going to do any of that right now. We'll let that go. It's reminding us, you know, if you're saying you're done with this, but you can't go back. So do you really want to be done? And it's also notifying us that there are enough units in this scenario that processing of the supply phase takes a few seconds. I think around 5 to 10 seconds. So let's see, I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And in 5 to 10 seconds, it should finish the processing and say, okay, I've looked at every single unit on here and I have figured out the exact status of everything, which, although it does take a few seconds, is a lot easier than you having to do it yourself. Not surprisingly, at the beginning of the scenario, nobody is out of supply. So we'll close that. And this gives us the ability to change the supply status should we ever want to do so. And we want to confirm it just in case you want to see the complete supply report. This will tell you exactly what's going on, and it will remind you about supply lines and supply effects on combat and so forth. We won't bother with that too much. So now we're starting to get into the meat of things. We've left most of the initial stuff behind here. And the naval transport phase, because as I mentioned, all of the supplies and the new units are sitting around in the UK. We've got to get them across the water to get them to France, and this is the phase in which we can do that. For purposes of this scenario, the Allies don't have any amphibious shipping capability, but they have quite a lot of ordinary sea transport capability. And that's not going to be a problem. If you want to bring over, for example, 100 armor divisions, assuming you had them, in terms of sea transport, sure, go ahead, bring over 100 armor divisions. That'll be fine. Now, of course, the Allies didn't really have that much, but it was essentially unlimited for purposes of what we're doing here. The limitation, of course, is not with the units in the UK, not with the transport of getting them to the continent. The limitation, the real bottleneck, is the ports. There's not a huge amount of port capacity at this point. And as everybody knows, that was one of the key things that the Allies needed to capture during the campaign is port capacity. So the same thing is going on here. So if, for example, I say, show me friendly ports, so it puts the red anchors on here. Cherbourg, which is now in Allied hands, but by the way, we can take a look at this. We can see that the full capacity there is 6 REs, but there's 6 hits on it, so there's no available capacity in Cherbourg until we get some engineers in there and straighten out that port. Instead, what we have here, and this is, I've kind of wiggled this a little bit for game purposes, is here we have Utah Beach, which I am considering a port for purposes of this scenario. So ordinary sea transport can bring in units and supplies to Utah Beach, to Omaha Beach, and to Mulberry B down here at Sword, Gold, and Juneau. So these are the places right now where the Allies can land supplies and units. And it's kind of a tight run thing. That's there's some extra capacity, but not a whole lot of extra capacity. And as additional units do come ashore, that's going to make things even tighter unless the Allies can get more port capacity. And of course, they'll will want to repair the hits up here on Cherbourg is one way to get more capacity. So let's just say, for example, that we want to bring in something, units and or supplies here to Utah Beach. So we'll give this a click. Yep, let's click right in here. Here we go. And now this gives us the information that we need in order to be able to decide about transporting things to the continent into Utah Beach in particular. Naval transport capacity, 100 REs. That should cover just about anything you want, but no amphibious capacity. But it doesn't really matter because we're allowing Utah Beach to serve as an ordinary port for purposes of this scenario. Port capacity that's available, 24 REs. So we can bring units in here. We could pick whatever units we want. These are all guys sitting around in the UK at this point, and there will be more. And we can bring in supply points. So we can do either supply or units or both through this port. So let's talk about supply for a minute. The supply leash for units is ordinarily 7 hexes to a road and then 7 hexes from a road to a depot according to my experimental supply rules. You can have a depot in any hex that you want. You can freely create depots, but you need to get your supply points to the depot, and that doesn't happen by magic. There are a number of ways of getting your supply points to your depots, and these are particularly important for the Allies who have to bring their supplies across the water to get to the continent. So one way that you can get supplies to depots is by sea transport, and that's what we're looking at right now. But of course, that doesn't do any good for inland depots. So if you're only talking about depots that are in ports, then 14 hexes is your maximum supply leash, and that's not enough to cover all the territory where the Allies will need to be fighting farther down in the Vosges and along the Rhine, the lower Rhine, or what is that, the upper Rhine, and so forth. Another way you can move supply points around is by air transport. Now, the Allies obviously have tons of aircraft, including tons of transport planes, but for game purposes, for supply purposes, they don't really have a massive amount. You could not really expect to support an advancing army by flying supplies into depots. So they can do a little bit, but that's not really enough to solve the problem. The next thing is you can use railroads. But at the beginning of this scenario, the Allies have 0 rail cap. Now, that rail cap is going to go up turn by turn, as it did historically. But to begin with, there's not really going to be enough rail capacity to get your supplies far enough forward, especially because there are going to be some rail breaks that are going to cause problems. Okay, so what's another way to do it? Another way to do it is to use your ground combat units to carry supplies. Well, that's really inefficient. Ground combat units have better things to do than to be carrying supplies around and dropping them off. So the final thing is truck units, and each side will have quite a few truck units, but they've got to get them over to the continent, and getting them onto the continent means that they themselves will burn more supplies. So it becomes a bit of a balancing act to figure out how many units to bring over, how many trucks to bring over, and how many supplies to bring over, and all of those things are contingent on the bottleneck of ports that are captured, repaired, and in use. So that's one of the main things that's happening in this scenario is the Allied player has to worry about capturing ports in order to deal with those logistical issues. So here we go. It's not going to matter too much at the moment. We actually have quite a few supplies stockpiled in Normandy, but we don't have a whole lot of ways of moving them forward. As long as we're in Normandy, we're okay. As soon as we break out, we're going to start to have some problems. But for the heck of it, let's bring in 12 supply points here. We'll conduct a convoy. No interception, no weather or sea conditions. So supplies added to the depot there at Utah Beach. Let's bring in something else. This is really kind of silly. I'm going to bring in the Polish 1st Armored Division, but Normandy is already so packed with units that I believe just about every hex is overstacked. The system will allow you to overstack a hex, but it's not a good thing to do. There's nothing good can come of overstacking a hex. But when you look at the historical situation in Normandy, these are the guys who were ashore, packed into that small amount of space. So that's what's happening. They're overstacked. Anyway, I'll bring in another unit. I'll bring in the Polish Armored Division. We'll conduct that convoy. And I could do all this together. I could have done them in a single convoy, but I did it as two just to show what's going on. And we'll click over here yet again. And we can see that port capacity is going down because we have been using it. This is the availability in that port capacity. So that's what's happening. We could bring over more supplies. We could bring over more units, although there's no place to stack them at the moment. But we'll say that's enough. We'll cancel that convoy. We'll end the transport phase, and it's reminding us you really want to do this because you can't go back. You can't tell your opponent, oh, I forgot to do this. I want to go back to the transport phase. No backing up here. So that's that. It's warning us. We just put some units into 1739. That's Utah Beach, and there's an overstack there. So watch out. All right, well, we know there's an overstack. Now we get to the movement phase. And this is pretty ordinary. I've shown this in a number of different demos of scenarios. So let's just give it a couple of little clicks here. I think we'll find a lot of armored divisions. Yeah, but some of these armored divisions are overstacked, so they can't move, they can't attack, they can't do anything except consume supplies. So useless mouths, I believe that was Churchill's term. Useless mouths there with the British Guards Armored Division and the 11th Armored Division, because there's just too much stuff packed in there. Now, we could have resolved all of that by free deployment back at the beginning. It could have said, yeah, let's fix this up. Let's get these armored divisions into better positions, and we'll shuffle things around so no one will be overstacked and none of these guys will be useless mouths. But we just played the more or less historical deployments here. So that's what it is. Let's go ahead. This is going to be kind of silly, but let's go ahead and do it. We're going to move all these guys into here, and we'll merge all of them into one headquarters. Its warning is, again, it likes to warn us. And by the way, we can turn off those warnings if we wanted to. Its warning is that we've got a heck of an overstack here, and we do. And this is going to get worse. Going to get worse. All right, so we're done with that. What do we have in here? Well, this is a reasonable stack here. Let's, because I'm not really playing this game, let's we'll leave this guy behind and move all these guys into here. We'll merge that. Yeah, there's going to be an overstack. Okay, so what I've done for the movement phase is I didn't move very much, and I didn't move very far, and I didn't make very smart moves, but I did push some units into some hexes. Not going to worry about the yanks. I'm not going to worry about trying to make this be a sensible move. It's just an idea of how the mechanics work to give an idea of what the situation is here in Normandy. And the situation is that most of the German defenses are anchored in bocage. And bocage, I don't need to tell you, you already know. Bocage is very good defensively, much harder to attack units that are in bocage. But here, there is no bocage. That is a clear hex. So there's no fort there, nothing but a clear hex. So that is that's a vulnerable point. And because we didn't do any German redeployment, free redeployment at the beginning of the game, the odds are that's a pretty weak hex, and the system doesn't look at it and say, oh, that's a clear hex. Some of this stuff should go into here. We just randomly put the stuff in there. So this looks like it's going to be pretty vulnerable. And if we give this here, let's plan an attack. Now, it's never necessary to plan attacks, but sometimes it's useful, especially if you're going to do a whole lot of attacks. You might forget what your intentions were by the time you have planned out your entire front, your entire series of individual combats for that turn, and this just will help remind you of what you intended to do. So we'll go ahead and see about planning here. Get some attackers here and here. So we're going to attack from these two hexes into this hex, the vulnerable clear terrain hex. We'll initiate the planning. And we're going to look down here, and we're going to see that some of these guys are already marked as being overstacked. Some of them are not yet marked as being overstacked, but they will be marked as being overstacked because they're way overstacked, and the system is not going to let us attack with overstacked units. How is it going to determine who's overstacked? It's going to be completely randomized. So if I go in here and plan this attack and say I want the Canadian 2nd Infantry Division to participate in this attack, it might turn out that the Canadian 2nd Infantry Division gets randomly earmarked to be an overstacked unit, and therefore it's going to be unable to attack, just like the 3rd Infantry Division. So although planning attacks I find to be very useful. I think it's a great idea. I'm really glad that I added that to the computerized system. Um, we're not going to do it because we're going to be in a position that is not going to make sense, because nothing good can come from having all of these units overstacked, and it's just going to cause problems if we do that. So let's go back up here and say we're done. We're done with the movement phase. And it's going to warn us, you know, if you end this, you can't go back. You might want to check your supply situation, blah, 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 all these things to watch out for, which you don't care about right now. You know, if we were really playing the scenario, we would want to check out these things, but we don't care right now. So we'll say, okay, and it takes us to the combat phase. And for the combat phase, let's go back here. Let's take a look at this again. And this time when we initiate the attack, we can see the system has indeed marked a lot of these units as being overstacked, and they're not able to attack. So what we have left is, excuse me, is we have only those units that are not marked as overstacked. So we will be attacking with just those. And even so, that gives us a 5.4 to 1 with a +3 die mod. Pretty good odds. Plus, keep in mind that in my system, that 0.4 has a 4 in 10 chance of rounding up to 6 to 1. On top of that, although I haven't really finalized these numbers yet, I'm showing that the Germans only have a total of 3 air points available for DAS. Doesn't change the odds too much, especially when you look down here and you see that the Allies have, and again, I haven't finalized these numbers, but I think this is about right, about 200 points. I could pour them all in there, and of course you can't use them all. That's overkill. That's more than we'll be allowed to participate. But since that's all we're doing, I don't care. I'll go ahead and put all 200 of them in there. The odds have kicked up to 9.8 to 1 with a +2, and that difference. There's some things, some uncertainty things that happen in the background, and so that might end up being a +2. That might end up being a +3. And it's Schrodinger's cat. We don't know until we open the box, until we roll the dice. We don't know whether that's going to end up as a +2 or +3, or maybe something else entirely. And for those of you who like mathematical certainty, I'm sorry, but I have built some uncertainty into the game because I don't want players to feel like they have to be so precise in everything they do to get the exact odds that they want. Sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not going to work, and that's war, or at least war games. Anyway, here we go. Let's resolve the combat. So give that a click. We're going to see the full results over here. This is everything you could possibly want to know about what's going on down here, yada yada, everything that happened. But basically all we care about is here. It's a DE, well, which does not come as a surprise. So all of the defenders are eliminated. There was nobody there who had a cadre, so we couldn't flip anybody to a cadre and then retreat them. But we are now ready for the advance. And when we look at this, who are we going to push into this hex? Well, let's take none of those guys and all of these guys. And there's probably better decisions to be made, but that's what we'll do. We will conduct the advance with them. They pop into the hex, and here we go. We could now move on to the next attack if we wanted to do so. We could say, let's try attacking here, or maybe here. We could do that if we wanted to. Anyway, that's about it. That's an idea of what's going on with the France 44 scenario that I'm getting very close to finishing as soon as I get around to doing some data entry for reinforcements and substitutions and withdrawals and things like that. As we can see in this case, the Allies are just about to break out of Normandy. And as I mentioned back at the beginning, the Allies breaking out of Normandy is one of the things that will trigger the release of the frozen German units in Brittany, on the Atlantic coast, in southern France, because Ob West is going to see that, hey, things are looking rough in Normandy, and if we don't get these guys out of these far-flung places right away, we will never get them out. So the odds are that after the exploitation phase for the Allies, that those withdrawals or optional withdrawals, their movement will be triggered for the German forces to get out of there. So that's what we're looking at. France 44, not a game of the invasion of Europe, not Second Front, not an invasion of France, but rather when we finish up the Battle of Normandy and start to break out, will the Germans be able to form a line? The battle should get back over here into Belgium and the Netherlands and along the Rhine, and several more turns will be there, and we'll see what's happening. So that's it. That's my France 44 scenario. Thanks for listening, and happy gaming.